What kind of father tests his own children by pretending to be lonely, only to discover that their absence was louder than their words? I sat at my kitchen table with the check in front of me, a trembling pen in my hand, and the name of a waitress. Someone who had shown me kindness when my own blood could not, about to inherit $6 million. My kids would call it betrayal. I called it justice. It hadn't started this way, of course. For most of my life, I believed in family above all things. When my wife, Margaret, passed away 5 years ago, I thought my children would step in, fill the silence, maybe even rediscover me as more than just Dad, who sent checks at Christmas or picked up the tab at restaurants. Instead, the house became an empty museum, and their visits became rarities excused by careers, travel, and just so much going on. The idea for the test came to me one gray November morning. I remember staring out the window, watching the bare trees bend in the wind, and thinking, do they even know who I am without Margaret? Or am I just an obligation? I decided then that I'd stop reaching out first. I'd let the silence stretch, see who broke it, and I'd play a little role while I was at it. The lonely, needy old man, hinting at how badly I needed company. I remember the first call to my eldest, Karen. "Sweetheart," I said in my most fragile tone, "this house feels too big for just me. Sometimes I talk to the walls just to hear a voice." "Dad, you can't say things like that," she scolded, her voice brisk. "You'll make me worry." "Then come by," I replied softly. There was a pause, and then, "I'll see when I can fit it in. Work's been insane. You know how it is." I did. I knew exactly how it was. With Michael, my son, I leaned heavier into the performance. I called him one evening after fumbling deliberately with the television remote. "Mike, I can't figure out this thing. Haven't watched a program all week. Maybe you could stop by, fix it?" His sigh was heavy, impatient. "Dad, I can walk you through it over the phone. It's not rocket science." "But I'm not so good with these buttons anymore," I whispered. "Okay, fine, but I'm swamped right now. Maybe next weekend." Next weekend turned into next month. Then never. Only my youngest, Emily, showed a sliver of tenderness. She called every couple of weeks, asked if I was eating enough. But even she never crossed the threshold of the old house, not once in that entire year. "I'll come soon, Dad," she always said. "Promise." Promises turned to dust. So there I was, conducting my little experiment, and the results were plain. My kids had lives, shiny, busy, bursting with importance, and I had a house full of echoes. The loneliness I pretended became the loneliness I actually felt. That's when I met her. Her name was Clara, a waitress at a diner I wandered into on a rainy afternoon. I'd taken to sitting there with a cup of coffee, pretending to read the paper while really just waiting for someone, anyone, to notice me. Clara noticed. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair tied back in a bun and a smile that wasn't a part of the uniform. "Cold day for sitting alone," she said that first time, sliding my cup toward me. I chuckled. "Seems I do a lot of sitting alone these days." "Well, not while I'm here," she replied. "I'll keep you company. Coffee refills are free, and so's conversation." I nearly laughed at how easily she said it. No calculation, no size, no "when I can fit it in." Just a stranger giving me time. Days turned into weeks, and Clara became my only regular human contact. She'd sit across from me during slow shifts, tell me about her night classes, her sick mother, her dream of opening a bakery someday. She never made me feel like a burden. When I asked her once, half joking, "Why bother with an old man like me?" she answered without hesitation, "Because I hope someone will care about me when I'm old. Besides, you're good company." I carried her words home with me, heavier than any silence my children left behind. When Christmas came, I waited for the kids. The tree stood in the corner, lit but alone. No car pulling into the driveway, no voices in the hallway. Just a text from Michael. "Merry Christmas, Dad. We'll do dinner in January." Another from Karen. So sorry, flight delays. We'll call tomorrow. Emily at least called, but it was 5 minutes of guilt-edged chatter before she hurried off. Clara, though. Clara brought me a plate of cookies from her mother's kitchen. She stayed for an hour, even helped me fix the angel on top of the tree. I realized then that kindness isn't measured by blood. So when my lawyer asked, "Are you certain about this? Your estate is no small matter," I didn't hesitate. "I've never been more certain," I told him. "Write her name where theirs should have been. She earned it." Still, I can already hear my children's outrage in my head. "You gave it all to a waitress? Dad, are you insane?" But I am not insane. I am tired. Tired of begging for scraps of affection. Tired of pretending blood alone is enough. The check on the table waits for my signature. $6 million, sealed not by duty, but by gratitude. And as I press the pen to the paper, I whisper to myself, let them learn what loneliness feels like. The ink bleeds. The deal is done. After Margaret died, the house shrank in ways I never expected. Not in size, of course, but in soul. Every room carried her voice, every chair her imprint. I thought the kids would sense it too, would fill the space with their presence. Instead, they seemed to vanish further into their own world. I spent the first months after the funeral waiting by the phone, half expecting Karen to call just to ask how I was holding up, or Michael to show up with groceries the way he'd promised during the service. But life moved on for them. For me, it stood still. That's when the test began. Not maliciously at first, but almost like a game of curiosity. I wanted to see who would notice if I stumbled. So one day, I called Karen while pacing the quiet kitchen. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "I tried to cook last night and burned the pan. Nearly set off the alarm. I'm not sure I can handle this kitchen alone." Her laugh was quick, almost dismissive. "Dad, you never could cook. Remember when Mom used to ban you from making toast? You'll be fine. Just order out if you have to." I was hoping maybe you could stop by. Show me a recipe or two. "Dad, I'm swamped. Maybe later this month. Don't worry about it." I hung up with a smile pasted on. But the silence afterward was deafening. With Michael, the conversation was sharper. He was always the practical one, the type to find solutions without softness. "Mike," I said, sounding as frail as I could, "sometimes I don't even know why I bother waking up. The days all blur together." He groaned. "Dad, don't say things like that. That's depressing." "It's how I feel." "Then join a club. Volunteer, I don't know. You can't lean on me for this. I've got 2 kids, a job, a wife who barely sees me as it is." I swallowed my anger. "Of course, son, of course." It was Emily who nearly broke the pattern. She had Margaret's gentleness, her way of softening words even when they carried guilt. "Dad, I know I should come by," she told me one night, her voice crackling over the phone. "I think about it all the time. But between classes and work, I can't find the time." "I understand," I said. And I did. I understood perfectly. I wasn't important enough to make time for. The weeks dragged on, and the loneliness I'd pretended seeped into my bones. I spent mornings walking through Margaret's garden, weeds climbing over her roses, and evenings eating canned soup in front of the television. My test had worked too well. I'd proven that I didn't matter. And then Clara appeared. The diner smelled of coffee and grease, a far cry from Margaret's cooking, but it became my sanctuary. Clara always noticed me, even when she was busy. "Back again, Mr. W?" she teased one rainy Tuesday. "You make the best coffee in town," I said, though really it was her smile that brought me back. She leaned on the counter, eyes warm. "Or maybe you just like the company." I didn't answer. She already knew. Over the months, our conversations grew. She told me about working double shifts to pay for her mother's medicine, about skipping her own meals so her younger brother could eat. Yet she never carried bitterness in her voice. She laughed easily, asked about my day as though it mattered. One evening, As I left the diner, she pressed a small bag into my hand. "Mom made stew. Take some home. You shouldn't eat alone tonight." I stood in the rain clutching that bag, feeling more seen in that moment than I had by my children in years. It was around then that I called my lawyer. "I want to make changes to my will," I said firmly. He adjusted his glasses. "Changes? To remove your children?" "To test them," I murmured. "And they've failed. Every one of them in their own way." He leaned forward. "And who do you intend to name instead?" I smiled, thinking of the waitress who brought me stew in the rain. "Someone who knows the value of kindness." He looked skeptical. "This is highly unusual." "So is being abandoned by your own flesh and blood," I snapped, then softer. "Draw it up." From that day forward, the weight of the decision followed me. I'd sit in the diner listening to Clara's chatter and wonder what she'd think if she knew. $6 million. Enough to change her life forever. Enough to give her the bakery she dreamed of, to care for her mother without fear, to free her brother from worry. And yet, the other voice haunted me too, the imagined fury of my children. "You gave everything to a stranger? We're your family." But were they? One night, when I was especially weary, Clara caught me staring at nothing. "You okay, Mr. W?" she asked gently. I sighed, just thinking how life surprises us, who stays, who leaves. She tilted her head. "Sometimes the family you choose is better than the one you're born with." Her words settled into me like truth. When I left the diner that evening, I knew the ink on that paper wouldn't just be a signature. It would be my final statement to the world, my last lesson to my children. Love cannot be inherited. It must be given. And so I signed. The storm broke sooner than I expected. It began with Karen. She came by at last, not out of affection, but because she'd caught wind that I'd been meeting with my lawyer. My children had always sniffed around money like dogs at the scent of meat. I heard the slam of her car door, the hurried heels on the walkway, and then her voice, sharp and demanding, before she even crossed the threshold. "Dad, why didn't you tell us you were rewriting the will?" I stayed seated in Margaret's armchair, staring at the fire I had built for myself. "Because none of you asked." She froze, thrown off balance by the bluntness. "That's not fair. We've all been busy. But we care. Of course we care." I met her eyes, saw Margaret's blue in them, but none of her tenderness. "When's the last time you set foot in this house, Karen? You used to sit right there on the rug with your mother, helping her sort ornaments every Christmas. This year, the tree died in the corner before anyone came." Her lips tightened. We had plans to come in January. Michael and I talked about it. You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said, voice steady. "I've simply stopped pretending." She didn't like that answer. She stormed around the room, picking at dust on the shelves, frowning at the clutter of newspapers. "So what then? You're going to punish us? Give everything to charity?" "Not charity." Her eyes narrowed. "Then who?" I didn't answer. I wanted to see how long it would take before she guessed. She didn't. Not that day. But she left with anger stitched into her shoulders, slamming the door so hard Margaret's china rattled in its cabinet. The others came soon after, word spreading like wildfire. Michael called, his tone controlled, but clipped. "Dad, let's cut the nonsense. We need to talk about your estate. You can't make reckless decisions just because you're lonely." "Reckless?" I echoed. "Do you know what's reckless, son? Raising children who think money is the only language their father speaks." There was silence on the other end, then a muttered curse, and the line went dead. Emily came last. Sweet Emily, who had once been my hope. She arrived in tears, flinging her arms around me, begging, "Dad, please don't do this. I'll come more, I swear I will. Every week if you want. Just don't shut us out." Her tears stung me in a way her siblings' anger hadn't. For a moment, I wavered. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think she would truly sit with me, laugh with me, care for me. But promises are easy when $6 million are at stake. I remembered every holiday missed, every call that ended too quickly, every empty chair at my table. And then I remembered Clara, balancing plates on her arm, still finding time to sit with me for 5 minutes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. So I held Emily's hands and said softly, "This isn't about shutting you out. It is about thanking the one person who didn't need an inheritance to love me." Her face crumpled. "A waitress? Dad, you can't be serious." "I am." The days that followed were war. Karen's emails, long and bitter, accusing me of being manipulated. Michael's threats of contesting the will. Emily's calls, alternating between sobbing pleas and icy silence. But through it all, Clara kept showing up. "Rough week?" she asked one evening, setting down my usual coffee. I laughed without humor. "My children think I've gone mad. Maybe they're right." She sat down across from me, her apron still dusted with flour. "You're not mad. You're hurt. That's not the same thing." I studied her then, really studied her. She had lines under her eyes from too many sleepless nights, hands rough from endless work. She had no idea that with a single stroke of my pen I had changed the course of her life. "Clara," I asked quietly, "what would you do if someone gave you $6 million? She blinked, then laughed, shaking her head. "I'd think they were insane, but I guess I'd buy Mom a proper nurse, get my brother through college without debt, and maybe open that bakery I keep talking about. Why? You got a winning lottery ticket hidden somewhere?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." She leaned forward, suddenly serious. "Money's nice, sure, but it doesn't fix everything. People do. That's why I try to be good to the ones who cross my path. You never know when you'll be someone's only friend." Her words pierced deeper than she knew. I went home that night and sat in Margaret's chair again, staring at the check, the ink already dry. For the first time, I felt no guilt. My children had made their choices long ago. I was making mine now. The storm they stirred would only grow louder when I was gone. But I would leave behind a truth they could never ignore. Love neglected is love lost. And Clara, kind, undeserving Clara, would inherit not just my fortune, but my faith in the world I was leaving behind. The only question that remained was how long it would take before my children discovered her name written where theirs had once been. They found out sooner than I hoped. The news broke the week after I signed the final papers. I hadn't meant for it to happen so quickly. My lawyer was supposed to keep it quiet until the time came. But Karen, with her relentless need to pry, had leaned on a mutual acquaintance at the firm. She arrived at the house unannounced, eyes blazing, a crumpled copy of the draft will in her hand. She slammed it down on my table, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness of the kitchen. "A waitress, Dad? A goddamn waitress?" I didn't flinch. I'd rehearsed this confrontation in my head 100 times. "Her name is Clara, and she's been more of a daughter to me this past year than you have." Karen's face twisted, a storm of disbelief and fury. "This isn't funny. This is fraud. She's using you. Can't you see that? Some 30-year-old woman cozying up to a lonely old man with money? It's textbook manipulation." I leaned back in my chair, my fingers laced over my stomach. "If it is manipulation to ask me how I am doing without checking my bank account first, then maybe I prefer manipulators to children who can't be bothered to visit." Her mouth opened, but no words came. Just rage, raw and sputtering. She grabbed the will again, shaking it in my face. "Michael's already talking to a lawyer. Emily, too. We'll fight this, Dad. You can't just erase your family like we're nothing." "You did that yourselves," I said, calm and cold. "Every time you promised to come and didn't. Every time you hurried me off the phone, every birthday missed, every Christmas skipped. You erased yourselves long before Clara walked into my life. Karen's eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. She spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard I feared the frame would splinter. 2 days later, Michael showed up, not with anger, but with arrogance. He strolled in like a lawyer entering a courtroom, voice smooth, rehearsed. "Dad," he began, "I've looked into this. You don't have to go through with it. There are ways to protect your assets, keep them in the family where they belong, trusts, foundations. Hell, I'll handle all of it for you. But handing everything over to a stranger? That's lunacy." "Family where it belongs," I repeated softly, tasting the words like something bitter. "Tell me, Michael, where exactly does family belong when it can even be bothered to change a light bulb in the old man's kitchen?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I've got responsibilities." "And I didn't?" I snapped, rising from the chair with a strength that startled even me. "I raised 3 children while working double shifts. I held Margaret's hand through chemo. I paid for your schools, your cars, your weddings. Don't lecture me about responsibilities." Michael's mask cracked for a moment, just long enough to show the boy he once was, ashamed, small, unprepared for the truth. Then he pulled it back into place. "You're making a mistake," he said flatly, "and when you're gone, we'll fix it." He left without another word. It was Emily who hurt the most. She didn't come in fury or arrogance. She came with her heart in her hands, trembling and raw. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. "Dad, please," she whispered. "Don't do this. I know I should have been here more. I know I let you down. But I love you. Doesn't that count for anything?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I nearly broke. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Of course it counts, Em. But love without action is just air. Clara acted. You didn't. That's the difference." She sobbed, pulling her hand back as if burned. "So that's it? You're replacing us with her?" I shook my head slowly. "No. You replaced yourselves with absence. Clara just filled the space you left behind. When she left, she didn't slam the door like Karen or stalk out like Michael. She slipped away quietly, shoulders bent, carrying her grief like a weight she could never put down. After that, the silence returned, thicker than before. No more calls, no more visits, just the echo of what had been said and what could never be taken back. Clara noticed the change. One evening, as she set my coffee in front of me, she studied my face. "You look like a man who just buried something." I smiled faintly. Maybe I did. Maybe it was already dead. She sat with me in silence for a long time. No questions, no judgment. Just presence. And that, more than anything, confirmed I had made the right choice. The storm with my children was far from over. I knew courtrooms and ugly words lay ahead. But in that quiet diner, with Clara across from me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. And peace, I decided, was worth $6 million. The peace didn't last. By spring, the phone calls began, not from my children anymore, but from their lawyers. Cold voices leaving colder messages, each one some variation of, "We intend to contest the will. We will prove undue influence. We will not let this stand." I'd listen, then delete them. At first, it rattled me. I imagined courtrooms filled with strangers dissecting my mind, questioning my choices, dragging Clara's name through the mud as though kindness were a crime. But the more I thought about it, the calmer I became. What could they prove? That a waitress had sat across from me and listened, while my own children did not. That she'd laughed at my jokes, remembered my stories, treated me like a human being instead of an obligation. If that was undue influence, then let the whole world be guilty. Still, I dreaded the day they found her. and it came sooner than I expected. One evening, as Clara wiped down tables, her eyes flicked toward the window. "Mr. W., I think someone's watching you." I turned and saw Michael's car across the street, his silhouette behind the wheel. He wasn't subtle, never had been. "Don't worry," I told her, though my stomach twisted. "That's just my son, checking up on the old man." The next day, Karen marched into the diner herself, heels clicking like gunshots. She went straight to Clara, ignoring me completely. "You're Clara?" she demanded. Clara glanced at me, unsure. "Yes?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "My father's been talking about you, says you've been helping him." The word dripped with venom. Clara straightened, her chin lifting. "I pour his coffee and make sure he's not lonely. That's all." Karen scoffed. "That's all?" "Funny, because it looks like it's worth $6 million. The diner went silent. Heads turned. Clara flushed crimson, but her voice didn't shake. "I never asked for anything from your father. Not once." Karen leaned in, her face inches away. "Then refuse it. Tell him to put his children back in his will." I rose then, my cane tapping against the linoleum. "Enough, Karen." She spun on me, eyes blazing. "Dad, she's using you, don't you see? You're just her ticket out of a diner uniform." I met Clara's frightened eyes, then Karen's furious ones. My voice came steady, sharper than I felt. "If kindness is a uniform, then I'd rather wear hers than your arrogance." Karen's jaw clenched. She stormed out without another word, but the damage was done. Clara sank into the booth opposite me, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she whispered. "You didn't," I said firmly. "They caused it themselves." But I could see the fear in her eyes. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had no idea what inheriting my fortune would unleash. Over the weeks that followed, the attacks grew. Anonymous letters slipped under my door. "She's a gold digger. She's laughing at you. She'll disappear the moment you're gone." Calls at midnight, silence on the other end, even whispers at the diner. Regulars who once nodded at me now gave me pitying looks. Through it all, Clara never faltered. She still brought me stew from her mother's kitchen, still asked about my day, still sat with me in quiet when words weren't enough. One night, as we shared pie at the corner booth, I asked her, "Why do you keep showing up, Clara? After everything they've said?" She looked at me as though the answer were obvious. "Because you're my friend, and friends don't run when it gets hard." That was the moment I knew, beyond all doubt, that my children could scream, threaten, drag me into court, but nothing would change my mind. I was leaving $6 million to a waitress, not because she wanted it, but because she deserved it. And when I was gone, my children would have to face the truth. In the end, it wasn't money I valued. It was love. But they weren't ready to learn that lesson yet, because the real battle, the one that would test everything, was only just beginning. The real battle began the day I received the summons. It came in a crisp white envelope, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic as he handed it over. Inside, the legal language coiled like snakes. Petition to contest the will. Allegations of undue influence, diminished capacity, and fraud. My children had thrown the full arsenal at me. I sat at the kitchen table reading the words over and over. I could almost hear Michael dictating them, every phrase a dagger wrapped in polished professionalism. They wanted to paint me as weak, senile, incapable of knowing what I was doing. And Clara, they would drag her name through every gutter they could find. When I told her, she went pale. "Mr. W," she said softly, "maybe you should change it back. This is too much trouble. I never wanted to take anything from you." I shook my head. "You didn't take. I gave. There's a difference. But your family." "Clara," my voice was firm. "My family abandoned me long before you walked into that diner. This is about more than money. This is about truth. and I won't let them erase it. The first hearing was brutal. I shuffled into the courthouse, cane in hand, dressed in my best suit that suddenly felt too heavy. My children sat together at the plaintiff's table, a united front for the first time in years. Karen's jaw was set like stone, Michael whispered furiously into his attorney's ear, and Emily, sweet Emily, kept her eyes down, as if ashamed to be there at all. Their lawyer stood, smooth and commanding. Your Honor, this is a clear case of undue influence. An elderly man, vulnerable and grieving, manipulated by a much younger woman with financial motives. The so-called beneficiary is a waitress who befriended him in his loneliness. We contend she preyed on his weakness for personal gain. The words stung, but I forced myself to remain steady. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, gripping the stand. My children would have you believe I'm a fool, I said, my voice echoing in the chamber, that I don't know my own mind, but I know it very well. I know that when I lost my wife, they promised to be there for me, and they weren't. I know that when I called, they were too busy, too distracted, too indifferent. And I know that when I sat alone in a diner, one woman, who had no reason, no obligation, no benefit, chose to sit with me, to talk to me, to treat me like I mattered. I turned to look at them, each in turn. That is not manipulation. That is love. Something I gave freely, and something I never asked for in return. If the law says I cannot leave my gratitude to the person who showed it, then the law is broken, not me. Silence hung heavy after I spoke. Even the judge seemed moved, though he quickly masked it behind his gavel. The proceedings dragged on for weeks. My children's lawyer paraded witnesses, neighbors, acquaintances, even a doctor who had seen me once for blood pressure, to suggest my mind was slipping. But Clara never faltered. She testified with quiet dignity, admitting she had no idea about the will until after the storm began. I never asked for a dime, she said, her voice steady. All I ever wanted was to make sure he wasn't lonely. That's it. Her honesty cut sharper than any lawyer's rhetoric. Outside the courthouse, the press began to circle. Headlines splashed across the papers. Millionaire leaves fortune to waitress. Children cry foul. Reporters hounded Clara, flashing cameras in her face. Through it all, she kept working her shifts, kept checking on her mother, kept showing up with coffee and pie for me. One night, after a particularly vicious day in court, she sat with me in the booth, exhaustion written across her face. Why are you doing this, Mr. W? Why fight so hard? You could still change it, make the noise stop. I reached across the table, laying my hand over hers. Because for once in my life, I want my last word to mean something. And my last word is yours. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. The trial wasn't over. My children had money, lawyers, influence. They could drag this fight on for years if they chose. But as I looked at Clara, at the quiet strength she carried, I realized something vital. I wasn't afraid anymore. The money, the estate, the will, these were just tools. The real legacy I wanted to leave wasn't measured in dollars. It was the lesson my children refused to learn. Love neglected cannot be reclaimed. And no matter what the judge decided, that truth had already been written, more indelibly than any ink on paper. But the verdict, when it came, would change everything. The verdict day felt heavier than Margaret's funeral. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as I was led to my seat. My cane clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing my age, my fragility. Exactly the image my children wanted painted. But I lifted my head high, refusing to bow. Karen sat stiffly in her tailored suit, her expression a mask of righteous fury. Michael leaned back in his chair with his lawyer's smirk, convinced the law bent to people like him. Emily avoided my eyes. Her shoulders slumped, hands clenched in her lap. Of all my children, she was the only one who still looked like she might break. The judge entered, gavel cracking against wood, and the room fell silent. My heart pounded like a drum. "We are here to render judgment in the matter of the estate of Walter Green," the judge began. His voice was steady, but my blood roared in my ears. "The plaintiffs allege undue influence, diminished capacity, and fraud in the execution of Mr. Green's last will and testament. After reviewing the evidence, the testimony, and the applicable law, the court finds—" My breath caught. Time seemed to stretch. I gripped the arm of my chair, knuckles white. "That the plaintiffs have not met the burden of proof required to invalidate the will. The testament stands." For a moment, silence. Then the room exploded. Karen gasped. Michael cursed under his breath. Emily let out a choked sob. Across the aisle, Clara sat frozen, eyes wide, as though she hadn't understood the words. The judge's gavel hammered again. "Order! I remind the parties that this court has spoken. The will is valid." I exhaled, trembling, as the weight lifted from my chest. Against all odds, against every dagger they'd thrown, truth had prevailed. Karen was on me in an instant, her face twisted with fury. "Dad, you've ruined everything. Do you know what people will think? That you abandoned your own blood for some waitress." I stood slowly, leaning on my cane. My voice was calm, but it cut sharper than her rage. "I didn't ruin anything, Karen. I only revealed what was already broken." Michael shoved his chair back, glaring. "This isn't over. We'll appeal. You can't seriously believe she deserves—" "I don't just believe it," I interrupted. "I know it, because she gave me something priceless, Michael, something you and your sister never did. Her time." Emily approached last, her eyes brimming with tears. "Dad, I tried—" "You did," I said softly. "But trying without doing is still failing. I begged for company, Emily, and you let excuses become your answer." Her tears spilled then, but I didn't reach to wipe them. That was Margaret's way, not mine. My lesson had to be harder. When I turned to leave the courtroom, Clara rose too, still stunned, still pale. "Mr. W., I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," I told her, offering the faintest smile. "Just keep doing what you've always done. Be kind. That's all I ever wanted my money to reward." As we stepped outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but I barely heard them. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter than air. My children would hate me, perhaps forever, but they would remember. They would remember the man they ignored, the man they dismissed, the man who taught them with his final act that love cannot be inherited. It must be earned. And Clara, poor, humble Clara, would carry my legacy not in diamonds or mansions, but in the bakery she would one day open, in the lives she would lift with her generosity. $6 million was nothing compared to that. But as I watched her wipe her eyes in disbelief, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe I hadn't given her my fortune. Maybe, in truth, she had given me mine. And for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt at peace enough to let go when my time came. The lesson was written. The ink was dry. The rest was no longer mine to carry. The months after the verdict were strangely quiet. My children retreated into silence, a silence far heavier than the one I had first tested them with. No more phone calls, angry or otherwise, no surprise visits, no emails filled with legal jargon or guilt, just absence, pure and unbroken. At first it stung. I caught myself staring at the telephone, half hoping Emily would call, half dreading she wouldn't. But then I remembered the look on her face in that courtroom, the way she cried, not for losing me, but for losing what she thought was hers. That was when I stopped waiting. Instead, I leaned into the life I still had. Clara became a fixture, not just at the diner, but at my home. She'd drop by with her brother James, a lanky college kid who thanked me with a shy smile when I slipped him books I no longer needed. Sometimes she'd bring her mother, frail but sharp-eyed, who'd sit in Margaret's old chair, and tell stories that filled the house with warmth again. "Feels like family," I told Clara one evening as we shared supper. She smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "I'm sorry your own children don't see it that way." "Maybe one day they will," I said, though I didn't truly believe it. The money was already working its quiet miracles. Clara's mother had a nurse now, paid for without worry. James dropped his night shifts and focused on his studies. Clara even started sketching plans for her bakery, shyly showing me designs on napkins between coffee refills. "It'll be small at first," she explained. "Just a place where people can sit, feel welcome, like you do here." I chuckled. "You're going to build the one thing money never bought me, company." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "You've already given it to me, Mr. W. I just want to pass it on." Meanwhile, my children lurked on the periphery. I heard whispers through neighbors. Karen selling her second home, Michael cutting staff at his firm, Emily seen crying outside a church. Pride kept them away, but desperation made them circle. One evening, I found an envelope on my doorstep. No return address, just my name scrawled across it. Inside was a single letter in Emily's handwriting. "Dad, I don't know what to say anymore. I was wrong. I should have been there. Not for money, not for inheritance, just for you. I don't blame you for what you've done, but I don't know how to fix what's broken. If you can forgive me, I'll come tomorrow." I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. Forgiveness had always been Margaret's gift, not mine. I folded the paper carefully, slipped it into my pocket, and waited by the window the next day. She never came. Days passed, weeks, and still no Emily. Whether fear stopped her or shame, I never learned. The letter remained in my pocket, worn soft by my fingers, a reminder that remorse without courage is just another form of absence. So I stopped thinking of my children as heirs and started thinking of them as chapters. Their part in my story was written, and it had ended. Clara's part, however, was still unfolding. The day she opened her bakery, modest, warm, filled with the smell of fresh bread, I stood beside her, cane in hand, and felt Margaret's spirit stir around me. "You've built something beautiful," I told her. She laughed, cheeks flushed with pride. "No, we did. You gave me the chance." The shop filled quickly with locals, laughter bouncing off the walls, strangers finding comfort in food and kindness. Watching it, I realized my $6 million hadn't vanished into an inheritance. It had multiplied into something far greater: community, care, belonging. The very things I had longed for in my final years. I left that day knowing my legacy wasn't lost in bitterness or betrayal. It lived in every loaf Clara baked, every student James mentored with the scholarships she funded, every smile her mother gave from the safety of a cared-for home. And if my children ever drove past that bakery, wondering what became of their father's fortune, perhaps they'd understand. Perhaps they'd see that money, like love, grows only when given freely. As for me, I finally slept without dreams of empty rooms. For the first time since Margaret's death, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not a phone call, not an apology, not a visit that would never come. I was simply living. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance I could leave behind. Years passed, and the bakery flourished. Clara named it Margaret S. Table. A surprise that nearly brought me to tears the day she unveiled the sign. "She gave you love," Clara explained softly, "and you gave that love to me. It only felt right." The little shop on the corner became more than a bakery. It was a refuge. Single mothers brought their children there after school for warm bread and stories. Lonely widowers lingered with coffee, finding conversation where silence once lived. Students hunched over books, welcomed by Clara's easy laughter and the scent of cinnamon rolls. Sometimes I'd sit in the corner booth, cane resting against the wall, watching it all. strangers, bound by nothing more than hunger and kindness, creating the family I had once begged my own children to give me. "Feels like home, doesn't it?" Clara would whisper as she passed by with a tray. And it did. But my health, already fragile, began to falter. The doctor's words were gentle but clear. "Your heart is weak, Mr. Green. You should prepare yourself." I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had prepared for this moment the day I signed my will. What unsettled me wasn't death. It was the thought of my children, still living with their bitterness, never understanding what I had tried to teach them. Fate, however, had its own plans. One crisp autumn morning, I was sitting in Margaret's table sipping tea when the door opened and Emily walked in. She looked older, thinner, her face marked by years of regret. She froze when she saw me, then slowly crossed the room. "Dad," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't know if you'd still want to see me." I gestured to the seat across from me. "You came. That's what matters." Tears welled in her eyes as she sat. "I should have come years ago. I should have been here before Mom died, after Mom died, all the times you called and I made excuses. I don't know how to make it right." I studied her face. The same face that had once pressed against my chest as a child when she was scared of thunderstorms. My voice came steady. "You can't make it right, Emily. You can only do better now." She wept openly. And for the first time in years, I reached out and held her hand. Not as reward, not as punishment, just as a father who still carried love despite everything. Clara approached then, quiet and respectful, setting down a slice of apple pie. "On the house," she said softly, then slipped away. Emily glanced at her, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I said terrible things about her." "Yes," I replied. "And still she fed you?" Emily lowered her head. "I understand now why you left it all to her. She gave you what we didn't." "Do you?" I asked. "Because it was never about the money. It was about presence, attention, care. The things you can't buy, can't inherit, can't fake." She nodded through her tears. "I understand. I was too late." "No," I said, squeezing her hand. "You're here now. That's enough." For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt a bridge being rebuilt. Not perfect, not whole, but enough to walk across. Michael and Karen never came. They let their bitterness calcify into silence, convincing themselves I'd been stolen from them. Maybe they couldn't face the truth. Maybe they didn't want to. But Emily returned again and again, sitting with me at Margaret's table, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in tears. And Clara, with infinite grace, welcomed her without judgment. In the end, it was Emily who sat at my bedside when my heart finally gave out, her hand clasping mine, whispering through her sobs, "I love you, Dad. I should have said it sooner, but I love you." And in that last flicker of breath, I whispered back, "Better late than never." When I was gone, the world called me the old fool who gave a fortune to a waitress. But those who stepped into Margaret's table knew better. They saw my legacy in every loaf of bread, every steaming cup of coffee, every act of kindness Clara poured into her community. And perhaps in the quiet corner where I used to sit, they felt it too. That love neglected is love lost, but love given freely multiplies forever. That was the truth I left behind. The years rolled on, and Margaret's table became something I never could have imagined in life, a beacon. Travelers passing through town would hear of it and stop by, curious about the story of the millionaire who left his fortune to a waitress. They expected scandal, but they found warmth instead. Clara's laughter, the smell of fresh bread, children playing in the corner while their parents rested with coffee. Some stayed for hours, some returned again and again, and all of them left carrying a little piece of kindness with them. Clara never let the money turn the place into something gaudy. The chairs stayed mismatched, the coffee mugs chipped, the pies cooling in the windowsill like they had in the early days. She refused to let it become about wealth. "It's not about what he gave me," she'd tell new hires. "It's about what he taught me. This place is about love, not money." Emily, too, changed. She became Clara's shadow, working part-time in the bakery while finishing her own journey of redemption. She told anyone who asked that she had once been blind to her father's needs, too wrapped up in herself to see his loneliness. But in Margaret's table, she found a chance to keep him alive, not in guilt, but in service. On the bakery's 10th anniversary, they held a small gathering. Locals filled the shop, musicians played softly in the corner, and children I'd never met ran laughing through the aisles. At the center of it all, Clara stood beside Emily, unveiling a new wall at the back of the shop. The wall of remembrance. It wasn't for me alone. It was for anyone who had been lost, anyone whose memory deserved a place at the table. Polaroids, handwritten notes, scraps of poems, and faded photographs began to cover the wall, layer after layer, until it became a living tapestry of love. At the very top, Emily pinned a single letter in her own handwriting, the same letter she had once left on my doorstep. "Dad, I don't know what to say anymore. I was wrong." The rest blurred with her tears, but she left it there. A confession not to erase the past, but to honor it. Visitors often stopped to read it, some moved to tears, others to silence. Clara never explained whose letter it was. She simply let it speak for itself. Karen and Michael heard of the anniversary but didn't attend. By then, bitterness had consumed them. They had built their lives on the story that I had been deceived, robbed, made a fool of. Admitting otherwise would have shattered the fragile walls they'd built around their pride. And so, they remained absent. But absence no longer hurt me. Not where I rested now. Because Margaret's table kept me alive in every loaf of bread shared, every smile exchanged, every stranger who walked in alone and left with someone by their side. Clara carried me forward with her kindness, Emily with her redemption, the town with its gratitude. And in that quiet corner booth where I had once sat, people still paused, touched the plaque with their fingertips, and whispered, "Thank you, not for the money, for the reminder that love is the only inheritance that matters, and that sometimes the family you find is the family that saves you." Decades later, Margaret's table was no longer just a bakery. It was a legend. The small shop had grown into a chain of community cafes across the state, each one carrying the same heart, the same spirit. They weren't franchises in the cold corporate sense. They were sanctuaries, run by people who had once been saved by kindness themselves. Veterans found jobs there. Teenagers from broken homes found mentors. Lonely widows found conversation at the counter. Every location had its own wall of remembrance, and at the top of each hung the same plaque. Here sat Walter Green. He taught us that love neglected is love lost, but love given freely grows forever. By then, Clara had grown older, her hair silver, her hands gnarled from decades of baking. Yet her spirit never dimmed. She was known as Grandma Clara to children who weren't her own, and though she could have lived in luxury, she still lived in the same modest house near the diner where we first met. Emily stayed by her side. She never reconciled with Karen or Michael. Too much time, too many wounds. But she poured her energy into the cafes, ensuring my story was told not as scandal, but as lesson. She became the guardian of my memory. Her guilt transformed into grace. On what would have been my 100th birthday, Clara and Emily hosted a gathering at the original Margaret's table. The place overflowed with people, families, students, neighbors, even travelers who had only heard whispers of the story. A local reporter, microphone in hand, asked Clara, "Do you think Walter Green knew what he was starting when he left you his fortune?" Clara chuckled, her voice raspier with age but still warm. "No, He only wanted to thank a friend. But that thank you grew. That's what love does when you don't hoard it. It multiplies. Emily spoke too, her voice steady but soft. My father's lesson wasn't about money. It was about presence. He taught me too late, but I learned. And I'll spend the rest of my life teaching others so they don't miss their chance like I did. The crowd applauded, some with tears in their eyes. Later that evening, when the lights dimmed and the last guests trickled out, Clara and Emily sat together in the booth where I once sat. Between them was a single candle flickering gently. "You know," Clara whispered, "sometimes I still feel him here, like he's watching, making sure we're doing right by his gift." Emily nodded, smiling faintly. "He is here. Every smile, every loaf of bread, every person who walks in lonely and leaves with company. That's him." Outside, the sign glowed in the night air. Margaret's Table. A place named for the woman I loved, carried on by the woman who befriended me, and safeguarded by the daughter who finally learned what love meant. And though my body had long since returned to the earth, my legacy breathed in every laugh that echoed through those walls. The man who once pretended to be lonely had, at last, created a world where no one had to be. Years blurred into generations, and still, Margaret's Table endured. By the time Clara passed peacefully in her sleep, the cafes had spread beyond the state, beyond the country, carried by those who had once been customers and wanted to bring the same light back to their own towns. She left behind no children of her blood, but thousands of children of her heart. Bakers, waiters, and dreamers who saw her as family. At her funeral, the streets overflowed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, holding loaves of bread in their hands instead of flowers. They broke them together, shared them with strangers, and said, "This is what she taught us, to feed one another with more than food." Emily grew old, too, her hair white, her movements slow. She never fully forgave herself for those years she had left me alone, but she used her days to make sure others never repeated her mistake. She became the voice of Margaret's Table's mission, visiting schools, churches, shelters, and telling my story. "I was his daughter," she would say, her voice trembling but sure. "And I failed him when he needed me most. But I was given a second chance, through Clara, through this place. If you love someone, don't wait. Don't make promises for tomorrow. Show up today. Sit with them today, because love is measured in presence, not excuses." People listened. They carried the lesson home, and slowly, Margaret's Table became more than a bakery chain. It became a movement, a reminder etched into culture itself, that loneliness is a wound only love can heal. Even Karen and Michael, bitter to their final days, could not stop the tide. They died with their fortunes intact, but their hearts hollow, remembered only as the ones who tried to drag my name through mud. In time, their voices faded, while Clara's laughter, Emily's redemption, and my simple truth lived on. Generations later, when my name was spoken, it was not with scandal, but with gratitude. Children in classrooms learned the story of the old man who gave his fortune not to blood, but to kindness. Travelers carried it across oceans, and everywhere Margaret's Table stood, there was a plaque with my words. "Love neglected is love lost, but love given freely grows forever." Sometimes I wonder if people will eventually forget my face, my house, even my name. Perhaps they will, but they will never forget the feeling of walking into a place that refuses to let anyone eat alone, and that is enough. The man who once pretended to be lonely had planted a seed. Clara watered it, Emily nurtured it, and the world carried it forward. A fortune once bound in numbers had become a fortune measured in lives touched, loneliness healed, love multiplied. And so my story, our story, never truly ended. It keeps unfolding at every table where a stranger is welcomed as family. Long after Clara and Emily had passed, Margaret's Table became woven into the fabric of the world. No longer just cafes, they evolved into community hubs, part bakery, part shelter, part school, part sanctuary. Every city had at least one. Some small towns had two because no one wanted anyone to go without a place to sit, eat, and belong. The walls were filled with stories, handwritten notes from people whose lives had been changed by a loaf of bread, a smile, or simply the presence of another human being willing to listen. Technology advanced, societies shifted, but the soul of Margaret's table never changed. No screens replaced the warmth of human servers. No automation stole the ritual of bread baked by hand. Even as skyscrapers loomed outside, stepping into one of those shops felt like stepping back into a world where time slowed and people mattered. Generations of Clara's apprentices carried the mission forward. They kept telling my story, though it changed in the telling. Some called me the lonely millionaire, others the forgotten father. But the heart of it was always the same, that kindness from a stranger mattered more than inheritance from neglectful kin. My words, "Love neglected is love lost, but love given freely grows forever," had outlived me, etched on plaques, murals, and even taught in classrooms. In one university course on ethics and legacy, students debated my decision. Some argued I was cruel, that blood should matter above all. Others argued I was brave, that I had given the world a gift disguised as defiance. And in those debates, new generations wrestled with the same questions that once tore my own family apart. One spring, a group of children visited the original Margaret's table on a school trip. Their teacher pointed to the wall of remembrance, thick now with decades of letters, photos, and scraps of paper. "Do you know why this wall exists?" she asked. A little girl raised her hand shyly. "Because someone was lonely, and then someone sat with him so he wasn't anymore." The teacher smiled. "Yes, and that small act of love became this." The children pressed their hands to the wall, adding their own notes. "I love my grandma. I'll sit with my friend at lunch tomorrow." Simple, childish promises, but real. And in that moment, I was there. Not in flesh, not in memory alone, but in the ripples of kindness spreading outward, far beyond what I ever could have imagined when I first signed my name to that will. My children had once thought I betrayed them, but in truth, I gave them, and the world, a mirror. A reminder that money vanishes, but presence endures. And as long as a stranger walked into a Margaret guest table and found a seat waiting for them, my story would never end. The man who once pretended to be lonely had, in the end, created a world where loneliness was no longer fate, but something love could undo. And that was the inheritance that outlived us all. In the end, my story was never about wealth, betrayal, or even revenge. It was about presence, the simplest, rarest gift a person can give. My children had every opportunity to offer it, but they chose absence, and absence became their inheritance. Clara, with nothing but kindness and time, gave me what I had begged for in silence. That was why she received my fortune, not as reward, but as proof that love multiplies when planted in the right soil. The world would remember the scandal of the millionaire who gave it all to a waitress, but the truth ran deeper. I gave it to love itself, and love through Margaret's table gave it back to the world 1,000-fold. That is the final conclusion of my life. Money fades, names fade, but kindness, when chosen, when given, outlives us all.